Welcome to the Whose Body Is It podcast. I'm your host, Isabella Malvin. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a birth worker, life coach for sovereign women, hypnotist, and a former liberal feminist turned radical truth teller. On this podcast, I expose the forces at play attempting to control our minds and bodies, such as transgender ideology, porn, prostitution, and so much more. Together, we'll untangle patriarchal lies as you listen to jaw-dropping interviews with women from around the world. Warning, while listening to this podcast, you might find yourself triggered or perhaps notice where you've been biting your tongue on the issues that matter most to you. In my coaching, I help women stop getting triggered by every freaking thing, cultivate resilience, stop unwanted behaviors, and increase self-confidence. You can book your first session at whosebodyisit.com. And I want to just say that it's because of your endless support that I'm able to interview amazing women, get their stories out, and produce regular episodes for all of you. So with that being said, please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel on YouTube. And if you're just listening in, leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and consider making a financial contribution via the link in the show notes. You can also visit my activist sticker shop. My pro-woman stickers have the power to intercept transhumanist programming. So be sure to take a photo of your stickers out in the wild and tag me on Instagram at Whose Body Is It. So before we get into this week's episode, I wanted to give you a bit of an update on what's been happening in my world for the month of June and July. June started off so amazingly with the two Austin events that I produced. One was Women Leaving the Left, a panel of speakers at the Austin Public Library. The recording of that talk is now available on my YouTube channel. We had about 36 protesters banging incessantly with metal objects on the walls of the event meeting room for a solid 3 hours. It was pretty wild, but our speakers persevered, and it was such a privilege to be able to produce and moderate that event and to be able to meet so many of you in person. The following day, Mary Lou Singleton and I hosted an autonomous fertility workshop. That was a really, really special experience, and stay tuned for more collaborations between me and Mary Lou to come. I then made my way to North Carolina to attend an all-women's festival. Yes, all women, called Matriarch Rising Festival, put on by my dear friend Emily Saldea, who runs the Free Birth Society. Fast forward to July, I ended up going on a spontaneous road trip through West Texas, and I spent a couple days in Marfa, which, for those of you who don't know, is a kind of a contemporary art hub. And I was astounded by how many trans flags I saw around Marfa. Nearly every cafe, gallery, business had a giant trans flag. Luckily, I came prepared with a couple dozen activist stickers, and I'll just say that fun was had. Possibly the most exciting thing about July is being able to host a live masterclass on unpacking common myths and misconceptions about Indigenous Two-Spirit and third genders. I've asked my dear friend Kay Yang, also known as the Deprogrammerxx, the woman featured in this week's episode, to tease out all of the lingering questions that I have, and I know so many of you have, around Two-Spirit and third genders and how it fits into transgenderism in 2022. So maybe you've been led to believe that it's all kind of the same thing. Maybe you've been told that, sex is dimorphic, is, white supremacist. Certainly, if you're listening to this podcast, you've questioned the legitimacy of and the industry behind transgenderism. Chances are, if you're here, you already have a radical feminist material analysis. You know what a woman is, but you're still unsure how it all fits into the history of slavery, colonization, and imperialism. So in this live masterclass, you'll finally get the answers to your lingering questions and learn how to approach conversations about two-spirit and third genders with friends, family, and even total strangers on the internet. The masterclass will run about 2 hours and 15 minutes. It'll be 90 minutes of a brilliant presentation by Kay Yang, followed by 45-minute live Q&A. The masterclass will be Thursday, July 28th at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. You can learn more about the masterclass by heading to my website, whosebodyisit.com/events. So, why does the United Nations want your kindergartner to know about gender identity? And why are they so insistent on allowing men and women spaces? In this episode, I'm joined by Kay Yang, also known as the Deprogrammerxx, for an in-depth look at the UN, its history, its funding, and the ultimate agenda. The UN was founded to reduce global conflict, but with an agenda that pushes transhumanism, mass surveillance, and tighter top-down authority across member nations, is it actually creating a future of global female subordination? The Deprogrammer brings a wealth of research to this conversation, as well as her personal experience in stakeholder capitalism. In this episode, we get out of the zone of lateral violence and learn to look up so that we can resist female erasure on a global scale. So we were recently in New York. Kay Yang, you organized an incredible protest or speak out at the UN. And until you had said to me, we're going to go to the UN, I had absolutely no idea that the UN was such a top player, I guess, in all of this. And so similar to other episodes that I've done where we're unpacking Planned Parenthood and other kind of institutions that we are told are kind of untouchable today, you're going to be telling us everything we need to know about the UN and why it's important. The first kind of framing that you just mentioned, which I think will be helpful and as an entry point for this episode, was, in 2021, we protested the Biden's executive order in DC. And so that was, that addresses what's going on a national level with rewriting, sex to include gender identity. And what you just shared, which you'll get into, is that what's happening at the UN is the global implementation.
Since you just mentioned Biden's executive order, I'm going to give kind of like a refresher on that. And then we can kind of, I'll talk a little bit about the protest or the speak out. And then from there, get into like, what is the UN and all the like kind of basics of tearing that apart for people so everyone can get a better understanding. Actually, you and I, Isabella, we met for the first time in DC, protesting Biden's executive order on gender identity. And just a refresher for people, for viewers, on what is Biden's executive order on gender identity, because it kind of came and went without a lot of attention from people other than on a grassroots level. It didn't really get spoken about in the media, and when it was spoken about, it was completely mystified and made to be something that it wasn't. So a lot of people don't even know that this executive order was passed, and if they do know, they don't know what it means. So this was executive order, I think it was 13988 is the number, and it basically gave a top-down executive authority to command the federal government to make these big sweeping changes that basically got our sex-based rights and language and legal protections for women and girls, and basically violate free speech of all Americans. The order changed how Title IX is interpreted and basically expanded the meaning of sex to start including males, and males who identify based on their own self-identification, right? So all they have to do is say so. That's what self-identification is. And basically including gender identity into the definition of sex. Thereby, at this point, we now know what that means. At that time, people were kind of unsure what that was going to look like, but now we know that sex really means nothing. If males can be counted as females and vice versa, then the sexually dimorphic reality of humanity has already been broken down. That process has begun. It's not going to happen in the future. It's not something that we need to warn about. It's something that is happening now. So basically all the harms that we kind of already saw happening with boys and girls sport in Connecticut and all of that, now we see, once those policies were implemented on a broader scale, now you see men all over the place in women's sport. So that's like an overview of what the executive order was. And as I said, Isabel and I met in DC protesting the executive order with like 200, 300 other women, something like that, which was really amazing and powerful. It's really important, though, that people understand that when the definition of sex is changed, then all anti-discrimination law changes. So any anti-discrimination law that was already set up that was supposed to protect women and girls on the basis of sex no longer functions in that way. So I already knew that the UN was a problem for quite some time now. It's been basically since 9/11, I started kind of looking at global sources of power and seeing where trying to figure out why there were so many problems in society. I'll just leave it short like that. And I already had an awareness that the UN was a major issue, a big player in increasing surveillance and creating just like a world of tighter top-down control and authority. But I didn't realize that the United Nations was so directly involved in pushing the trans agenda until a couple of years ago. I started to see some of their propaganda and I got really alarmed by it. And I thought that for some reason, I thought that others would see the same thing and that it would be, discussed. But then as time went on, I kind of started to see, well, not a lot of people are talking about it. Some people are, right? It's not like people ignored this issue. I know, for example, like Beth Stelzer put out a blog post about this on Save Women's Sports. PEC, Partners for Ethical Care, they put out a letter about this. All this was years ago. I think Elizabeth Miller is her name. There was a lawyer, and I think Kathy Brennan, they put out a letter as well about this, warning people that this was going to be happening. Of course, when some of those warnings were going out, I wasn't aware that the warnings were going out at the time. So after kind of piecing it all together that this was happening and then looking into taking what those women were saying as my starting point and looking in deeper, I found like, oh my God, this is massive. This is epic proportions. This is a trans agenda on a global scale. And now I know, and now we're all going to find out why this is this is literally taken over the world. It's maybe like 10 years ago, when I was working at an LGBT nonprofit, these terms like transgender and gender identity, this was all extremely new. The general public didn't have any understanding or concept of what these terms were. Right. I say all the time, there was no trans child. There is no such thing as a trans child. The trans child is a corporate fiction. It doesn't exist. This is a concept being forced onto children. But there was no such idea as a trans child back then. There were like teenagers and stuff that identified as trans. And actually part of my job, for viewers that don't know, was going directly into the public schools in New York and working to indoctrinate youth, basically, with this new ideology and with these new terms. And not just indoctrinate the youth, but also indoctrinate the educators there as well, because they didn't know about these terms either. Yeah, that was a big part of what I did there. And now indoctrination of youth is finally being exposed. And people think like, where did all this come from? This just started happening. Like, how come this is going on? This has been happening for a long time now. It's just now that it's being spoken about on a scale where the public is starting to get like a general awareness of it. And also I think it was happening for a long time and people didn't realize what it was. They didn't realize how harmful it was going to be, what the implications were. They thought it was a new part of, just like sex education. And this is a big part of where this ideology is sneaking in from in the schools. It's coming from the UN, actually. The UN is telling schools all over the world to implement this language. It's part of comprehensive sex education, which the United Nations also pushes. And we can talk about some of that later, but I'm trying to get to why we protested and the protest itself. And I'm bringing all this up because it's important back information for people to understand. Because again, in a lot of people's mind, they've been made to think that United Nations is something good, is something benevolent. They're just trying to help. They always say things, they hide behind like, oh, we're ending poverty. We're going to like stop violence. We're going
Humanitarian, the ultimate
it's
like
all
humanitarian.
humanitarian. Yeah. Exactly.
Mhm.
And they really hide underneath that that image of being just like good Samaritans for the world. But that's not what they are at all, obviously. So I started really looking at what the UN was doing and just going through everything, typing in transgender, typing in LGBT, anywhere I could search through their documents and see what is it that they were saying. And basically, I found out that they had already in 2019 inserted gender identity into the definition of sex. The way that the executive order here in the US that happened in 2021, but this global order from the United Nations came out in 2019. So that I was unaware of. So once I started looking into that, I said, well, I need to see what is the trajectory of this. And it turns out there's an entire history, which we will get into later. But that's kind of like where I started off. And once I realized what was going on, and I know how much control the United Nations has, I know, for example, they operate over 15 agencies that include players like the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, the World Health Organization, like UN AIDS, Population Fund. I know what a huge player they are. So I said, oh my God, if they are pushing the trans agenda, we need to start speaking out about this right now. We need to get women's attention and focus on what the United Nations is doing, on where this is coming from. Because I've been in this now talking about this publicly for like 4, almost 5 years. And there are so many powerful voices and really intelligent women and critical thinkers speaking on this issue. And if we can get even just a fraction of those women to turn their attention to what the United Nations role is and pushing female erasure on a global scale, then we might have a chance of exposing this. For us women, any women who are concerned about the erasure of our rights of women and girls and the push of gender identity and transgenderism on children, any women who are concerned about that need to know about the UN's involvement, because the gender identity and the transgender aspect of the larger global goals, it's just one segment of it, right? It's just one head on the hydra of the sustainable development goals, and that's a whole beast. So the protest itself, actually back in October, you and I met up in New York City again for a demonstration at NYU Langone, where we protested another gender identity clinic where they target youth for so-called with transgender medicines and gender affirming surgeries. So we were there. And then the next day, you and I met with some other women and protested the mandates that were being imposed with the vaccines and the masking and the passports and all of that. And after that, we were just like on a like protesting kind of like rampage. After that, we kind of took the signs around, and I told you and our friend Jen that I wanted to go down to the UN and hold up the signs, because at that point I had already been researching the UN and I had it in my mind already that I wanted to do a protest there. I just
Mm,
didn't know when it was going to happen or how to make it happen, but I knew that it would happen
right.
one way or another. And I felt like just our presence there, you, myself, and Jen, just our presence there that one day in October was the first protest in itself. I think it was the first time that any women ever showed up there, publicly named what the UN is doing and pointed the finger at them. So that kind of started me on being like, okay, there's going to be a protest here. And it's, difficult to get women together in the US. I think a lot of people want to compare what happens in the US to what happens in the UK, but we have to remember that the UK is like very, very small and geographically centric as compared to the US, which is
Yeah.
completely spread out. And it's really difficult for us to travel around. And then the COVID restrictions and the lockdowns made it even more difficult for women to travel around or do anything or get anything done at all, or
Yeah.
have the energy or the wherewithal
That's
to
a
get
great,
anything done.
yeah, that's a great point.
It also, the fact that I was seeing, and all of us were seeing such like sweeping authoritarianism with the COVID mandates and the lockdowns, it just made me all the more want to sift through all the like propaganda and also all the distractions and all the divisive BS and the psyops that get put out, and just brush it all aside and really delve into like what is going on and what the heck can we do about this.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I think that if we can get women activated on our end to protest this one goal, or this one goal, which is goal 5, gender equality, which is within the sustainable development goals. If we can focus on that, we have a really good chance, I think, of getting people to understand that this is part of a larger agenda. Because if we don't get people to understand it's part of a larger agenda, they're not going to fight the larger agenda. They're not going to see that there's an overarching issue that all of us are endangered by and affected by. It's going to continue the single issue and the divisiveness. Because honestly, there are a lot of women who are against gender identity and are concerned about the erasure of women and girls, but then they're also unknowingly promoting other UN agendas, and they don't even know that these are UN agendas. So
Right.
I won't get into the breaking that all down right now, but it's really crucial that we understand all the aspects of what's going on, because we're being lied to on a grand scale that's almost unimaginable. This is why I really wanted to get women together to protest at the United Nations. And I knew it would be difficult because a lot of women don't know what the UN is doing. But one thing that made it easy for me to, well, I won't say easy, it was not easy to organize everything, but it made it a lot easier for me to do it, I guess, because I had reached out to women that I had already established relationships with, working relationships and personal relationships with. And those women already knew that I had credibility, that I knew what I was talking about, that I wasn't someone who just makes stuff up, that I'm usually very well researched, and that I can be dependable and have skills.
Hmm.
And similarly, I reached out to women who I think are dependable, have skills. And that's not the only reason why the women that I did invite were there. And I don't want anyone to think that I know some people think that everything should be open for everyone to participate in. But I'm going to tell you right now, as an activist for over 15, 20 years now, that's just not how it works. We have to be strategic. We do things in a strategic way. And I won't get into all of the reasons why I chose to do it like this or why it shook out the way that it did. But I'm very glad it happened the way that it did. We ended up with a really great, tight group of women who all trusted each other and could work really well together, which was really important since women were trusting me to give them the information about why should they protest the UN. For
Right.
example, why should you, Isabella, protest at the UN with me? Why should Jeanette and Jennifer from PEC protest at the UN? Why should Joy from Femme Rebellion protest at the UN? When they are not focused on that and don't understand why the UN is part of the problem, well, I need to explain it to them, right? So we had like a couple of meetings where we did some info sessions, and we all sat there together and looked over the research that I compiled. I showed sources for everyone, and we kind of all got on the same page really quickly. And it was really quick because all of the women are so skilled in knowing what's going on already. Once I started to show the agenda, it was like click, click, click. Obviously, this is an issue that we need to get behind.
Right.
So that was the most important thing, was finding women to support this, because just me going out there by myself with my sign, well, I've done it and I'll do it again. But it's much more effective if we can get some other women and some other voices to showcase that this is all across the board. This isn't just this isn't just affecting women in one area. This is affecting every aspect of our lives.
Right.
Especially, I think it was so amazing, and I'm so happy that Kelly J. Keene was able to join us. It was so amazing. We weren't sure if she was going to be able to make it because she had so much going on in her short visit to the US, but she did make it. And I think it was an incredible show of solidarity, international solidarity building between the women of the US and the UK. And like our friend Jessica Gonzalez, the founder of Turf Collective, has pointed out, the US government is now pushing for an act. I can't remember the name of the act. It's in the video. She talks about it at the protest. But the act, she calls it the Anti-Posey Parker Act, because basically basically what it's going to do is women who, or it says people, but obviously women are the target. People who don't go along with gender identity won't be allowed into the United States. So Jessica's highlighted how this is really an attack on our ability and for women of the world to build solidarity and to talk to each other and say, hey, this is actually happening to all of us everywhere. This isn't just happening to women in America or the UK. This is affecting women all over the world. And this is also why it's so important that we speak about this issue, because women in parts of the world that are much more oppressed, that see much more violence against women and girls, that are much more authoritarian openly. In other places in the world, some women are still traded like chattel, like literally like livestock. And there are a lot of women that don't have the ability to speak on this just because of the daily drudgery of life. And then there are women all over the world who aren't aware yet that this is an issue, because it's being propagandized to women differently in different countries.
Right.
So some countries have these long histories of like gender variant males occupying specific roles in society. For example, like in India, they have the hijra. In Thailand, they have like lady boys and katuis, they call them. There's different names all over the world, but the gender identity, the trans agenda is being propagandized to women in different countries and different parts of the world in different ways, according to what will work, according to what's culturally relevant to them. So like I was just saying, for example, what would be culturally relevant if they already have some type of third gender role or variant gender role, and it's almost always for men to occupy. We can get into that later.
Right.
But it's important that we start sounding the alarm about this now, because I think we've got a really good understanding of what's going on with this issue, especially now that we're starting to get more women who have a really good analysis on how power functions globally, that are starting to come into this movement and make this more visible. And then there are women like Jennifer Billick, who have been speaking about the global nature of this aspect for years now. So I think if we can just continue to get women to get on board to recognizing that this is a global agenda, that's not a conspiracy theory, it's a conspiracy. It's an open conspiracy that they have no problem telling us what they're doing. And if we're not paying attention, well, then how are we going to stop it? And
Right.
that's really the biggest issue, is that everyone needs to pay attention. And I'm really asking women to try to set aside, like, try to get yourself disconnected from the constant stream of propaganda and psyops in the mainstream and the divisiveness and the celebrity BS, and really focus on taking a step back and like zooming out.
Yeah.
Let's zoom out and look in at what's going on here,
Yeah.
because we need to talk about the global nature of this agenda. It's
Mm-hmm.
affecting women everywhere, and we have a vested interest in speaking out, not just for ourselves, but for the to like ensure the future of humanity, because this is an agenda that doesn't just target human beings. This is also about direct control over all of the land, all animals, everything, the water space, airspace, everything.
So when we talk about the UN and the documents, can you pinpoint a team of people, a team of leaders, a team of like who are we talking about here? Yeah, I want to get like as specific as possible.
Yeah, let's talk about like what is the UN and just some
Hmm.
background on the UN. There's so much I could say. I'm actually really interested in the background of it, because it involves the beginning of the UN involves the Rockefeller family.
Hmm.
And there's some really interesting local history where I live about the Rockefellers. So I've been interested in kind of seeing what the connections are. I won't go all into it, but basically, the UN was born out of the League of Nations. And the League of Nations was established after World War One, and it was basically to it was promote international cooperation, right? And after World War II, they basically said, we're going to scrap the League of Nations because the League of Nations wasn't successful in preventing World War II. A lot of people might say that the League of Nations was behind promoting World War II. I don't know much the history about that, but the United Nations comes out of the League of Nations. So in 1946 is when the United Nations, the General Assembly, first like congregated. And I think this is really interesting. They weren't sure where they were going to headquarters the United Nations. They had the choice of like all over the world, right? They could go anywhere. They could do somewhere upstate, far away from everybody, but they eventually chose to do it right down in the middle of Manhattan. And the reason why they situated the headquarters where it is, where we protested, is because John D. Rockefeller, at the last minute, purchased the property for $8.5 million and donated it to the UN. It was a gift to the General Assembly. And for people that don't know who John D. Rockefeller is, he was one of the richest men in the world at one time. Um, so yeah, it's and also why was Rockefeller a household name?
Yeah, and like where did all his wealth come from?
And where did the Rockefeller money come from? Well, there's a long history. It's interesting. Maybe like 20 minutes from me is the house where J.D. Rockefeller grew up in, where he was born. And his father, J.D. Rockefeller's father, was what they call a snake oil salesman. And the people here locally called him
Mm,
Devil Bill.
wow.
And yes, and he would go around trying to sell like elixirs and tinctures to cure people, but oftentimes they didn't help or made people sick. And so he would go and sell his wares and then go somewhere else. And this is literally like, it sounds like a movie, right? But this is what JD Rockefeller's father was known for. And
Hmm.
he was also known for being a womanizer and
Hmm.
a bigamist. Like he had multiple wives at the same time, and he was a rapist. Um, so that's sort of the history of JD Rockefeller. Now, JD Rockefeller started Standard Oil, and he's like a major oil tycoon. Standard Oil eventually got broken down into like Exxon, Chevron, and I'm not going to name the other companies because I only know for sure those two are part of it, and then a bunch of other major recognizable oil companies all came from Standard Oil.
Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, I
So
didn't know any of this.
yeah, it's really interesting stuff. If you've heard the term robber baron, JD Rockefeller was like an original robber baron. Like, and that term basically refers to the people who were the men who were going around in the industrial era, like gaining control and power and just coming through and using their money to start dominating everything and taking huge transfers of wealth from the poor and building up huge transfers of wealth in the elite. So yeah, JD Rockefeller is one of the wealthiest Americans of all time. He established the Rockefeller Foundation and the Rockefeller University, and through that, they've basically shaped Western industrialized medicine. So their role is huge. Actually, their role has been direct in affecting like birth work,
Right.
because so basically there was a time I don't remember the exact dates, but basically when the Rockefeller Foundation and universities came into prominence, they established a system where anyone who wanted to practice medicine or get like a hospital license or medical license had to go directly through JD Rockefeller and the American Medical Association. And they were really targeting and trying to get rid of midwives. And they were getting rid of midwives, saying that their work was dangerous, saying that, you know, they don't have any credentials or qualifications to do this work, but we have our, you know, approved doctors and our approved medical facilities and our approved everything. And this is what you should, women, this is where you should birth your children. This is who you should go to for your birth work and your birth care. And taking the power away from midwives and putting it into the institution, into the hands of the doctors and the white coats and the scientists and the laboratories. That was all done by the Rockefeller family and the American Medical Association. And actually, last summer, the AMA, they put out I can't remember what it was. It was some type of document or they put something out saying that sex should be removed from our birth certificates to avoid discrimination against gender identity. So they think sex is discriminatory. And that's now what the American Medical Association is pushing. And the Rockefeller family also, I'll get off of them, but I do want to say they were very involved in eugenics as well. And Standard Oil did a lot of contracting with corporations who were directly involved in Hitler's Germany. And like IG Farben was one of the corporations they worked with, and they have a lot of crossover with Nazi scientists and doctors. And that's all stuff that people can go and research. The Rockefellers have promoted eugenics, but it's basically like a crypto eugenics where they don't use the term eugenics. They have like fancy terms like population control that comes up within the UN as well. So like I said, just to kind of recap, the UN was born out of the League of Nations after World War II. So they scrapped the League of Nations, replaced it with the United Nations, and JD Rockefeller purchased the land that the UN headquarters now sits on in Manhattan for $8.5 million, donated it to the UN. And obviously their family and foundation has continued to have a deep-seated relationship with the United Nations. So that's just a little bit about the history where the money comes from.
And why they chose that location. Yeah. Wow. Really interesting.
And it's supposed to be an international peacekeeping organization. They're supposed to resolve conflicts between nations. So it's interesting, resolving conflicts, I think, kind of ends up being like, it's not necessary, things aren't necessarily a conflict. They create the conflict and then they create a solution. Like, for example, I think that inherently in our in our gendered system in the US, in our gendered hierarchy of male supremacy and female subordination, that in itself that's the created problem, right? It's not natural. The subordination of the female and male dominance is not, I don't believe, natural.
No.
So our existing gendered structure is already an altered one. So there's been a problem with it, and there's like a false solution that is being provided through transgenderism, right? Like if
Right.
you're a girl
Right.
and you feel uncomfortable with your developing body, you hate your breasts, you hate the way that you look, oh, your hips are huge, oh, my ass looks like that. Now, instead of learning to love your body and make healthy choices to have the best and healthiest body, instead of promoting things like that, you're given the solution of, well, you can just be medicalized for life
Right.
and alter your body and learn to hate yourself and call it acceptance and love.
Right.
It's a false solution. So this is a created conflict with a false solution. And I believe that the UN is now going around like kind of pushing this solution for the problem of sex-based violence against women and girls, male perpetrated sex-based violence against women and girls.
Right.
It's now being reduced to and collapsed under the idea of gender-based violence. And that means that basically they're erasing the fact that women and girls experience specific violence on the basis of our sex and saying it's on the basis of our gender, and that women and girls have a shared gender with men who claim to be women and girls. So when the UN says that they are going to end violence and bring equality for all women and girls all around the world, their definition of all women and girls includes biological men and boys within the concept of gender identity. So every time you hear them say they're doing things for women and girls, they mean they're taking away sex-based rights of women and girls and forcing the inclusion of men and boys into our formerly female sex segregated spaces. That's what it means. It's a form of doublespeak, and this is all wordplay. And their propaganda is very advanced, and they have so much of it. And their reach is just, I mean, their reach is everywhere. So we have to be everywhere as well, like pointing out how they're full of shit. If we keep on poking holes in what they're doing, then that's how we're going to wake people up. Especially,
Right.
I think young people don't want to be lied to, and they are being lied to on a massive scale. And they're very real, righteous, like feelings of anger and contempt for the world and society. And those are real feelings that they have. And those are being they're playing on these feelings and these emotions to capture these young people and redirect their energies, right, into something, redirect their energies into something that's safe for the continuation of these global agendas.
Totally.
Because if we had, yeah. I'll jump around a little bit. I have so many things to talk about, but one thing to kind of play off what we're just talking about is that they have this this thing directed straight at children. What's it called? They call them agents of change, right? Children are called agents of change, and they want these children ready to go forward and push the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And they flat out say, I took the quote here, children and young women and men are critical agents of change and will find in the new goals a platform to channel their infinite capacities for activism into the creation of a better world. That's a direct quote from the UN. And I find this really interesting because some people know that I've been an activist and been involved in organizing, grassroots organizing for many years. And before I was speaking out on this issue, I was very involved in, quote, the environmental movement, and really like looking at and responding to issues of extraction and corporate desecration of the land, of the environment, and particularly of the corporate and governmental targeting of Indigenous people and their sacred sites for infrastructure projects. So I was already working in that area, and I started to um, put the dots together to realize that the environmental movement was completely controlled and hijacked and full of controlled opposition. It was actively being co-opted. I was seeing the co-optation in real time. Like, as we were coming out with analysis, as we were coming out with language to use, it was being immediately co-opted by the big green organizations, like, 350, Sierra Club. I won't get too much into all of that, but I will say that that whole movement is also funded by the Rockefellers. And in my previous work, I did a lot of exposing those connections. The Rockefellers, the Carnegie family, these big families that are behind the face of what gets branded as environmentalism and what gets branded as like climate change activism. So all of that is a co-optation of the very real resistance of people who have been resisting infrastructure projects, whether it's like families in rural areas who have farms that have been up for generations, or people, like I mentioned, Indigenous people or communities of color that have certain environmentally degrading infrastructure projects, whether it's like pipelines or refineries or wastewater management, car crushing, anything like that, where they have that situated directly in their area. These people have been speaking out, and people have been resisting on a grassroots level, and their voices have been co-opted. A lot of that resistance has been suppressed by the narrative that gets put out by the big green organizations. And there's a lot of layover here. Like, I notice a lot of similarities between how the co-optation was done in the environmental movement and what I see happening with LGBT. Because like I say, and I've said about my work when I was working at the LGBT Center over 10 years ago, I thought that I was doing something good. I thought that I was helping. I thought that I was helping to create a better world and making a difference in the lives of these young people. And I did not realize that my well-meaning, and my skills, my everything was being hijacked, that my infinite capacities, right? My infinite capacities for activism and the creation of a better world were being channeled to support broader agendas that I knew nothing about. And, I talk about how I've defined actually the trans agenda. I have a definition for it that I talk about, and it's very specific. And I think it's important that when we say trans agenda, that we have a meaning, that it's not just a word that we throw around, because a lot of people have used this term and they mean a lot of different things by it. But when I say this term, I'm talking about collusion from the state, from the corporations, from private interests and nonprofit organizations, foundations, all this collusion to make legal and social changes that are directly targeted at taking away our female sex-based rights and creating issues of safety and health issues for children, all under the guise of promoting LGBT and promoting transgender rights. So it's a Trojan horse. It's an LGBT trans agenda. And, a lot of people have criticized me for saying that, why don't you just say T if you just mean T? Well, if I just meant T, I can assure you I would have just said T. I say LGBT because it is major LGBT nonprofits that are behind this, and they were not co-opted to this agenda. They were created with this agenda specifically in mind, many of them.
Right.
So people have to understand that we don't get to control what LGBT means. I don't have control over that definition. I have to talk about it in a way that makes sense within the framework of the work that I'm trying to do, which is analyzing these power structures. So when I say LGBT, it's for a reason, because LGBT is in every single document and everything that is pushing female erasure. It's not to say that every lesbian, gay, or bisexual person is pushing this agenda. No, because also not all LGBT people had any say over the acronym of LGB or the addition of the T to it.
Right.
So we don't get to have a say over those things. Then it's frustrating to me, because a lot of people, like, I get this critique all the time of people being angry that I'm saying LGBT, like, oh, you're associating them with this and that. No, I'm not associating them with it. These major organizations and these major governing bodies are doing that. I am pointing that out because we have to be very specific about what's happening.
That's a great point.
Just
Yeah, because there are no overtly, like, they're like, even though we know that their emphasis is on the T, they don't call themselves T organizations. Like it could, because then the jig would be up. I mean, it's way more obvious if they were to just do the T, and they've latched onto that very valuable real estate to trigger that response in people. So yeah, I appreciate you laying that out and why that is. And like, one of the other videos that we did for my channel where you went through the LGBT pedo connection, I think people were upset about that. But for anyone who's wondering, yeah, you just clarified that why it's important to name that. And anyone who's been in this conversation for a while will know that the T is distinct from LGB, that LGB is a sexual orientation, while T is medicalization, propaganda campaign. It says it has nothing to do with sexual orientation, other than men who identify as women are expressing a fetish, which is not a sexual orientation, but related to.
Well, and also preying directly on young LGBT people.
Yes.
Specifically.
Yes.
Preying on, all LGBT people of all ages, but specifically targeting youth.
Yeah.
And even minors and children who we don't even know if they're LGBT or not. They could just be gender non-conforming, but just specifically targeting these children to manipulate them and hijack them into not just being activists for a global agenda that they don't understand, but also into mutilating and medicalizing their healthy bodies.
Yeah.
And there's just so many terrible stories from detransitioners that I've read lately of women just lamenting over what's happened to them and their bodies and wondering why no one stopped them.
Oh
and
my God.
And it's because this false solution of transgenderism is being pushed. We need to reach young girls. We need to reach them younger and younger, to be honest with you, because they're being reached younger and younger with the propaganda. So young girls have to start to be taught right away that actually this isn't about something that's wrong with you and your body and your feelings being mismatched. This is something that's wrong with the world. This is actually a global agenda. Bad people are doing this. And I don't think it's wrong to tell children that. I think that, look at everything else they're being exposed to. Children need to know that there are predators who are trying to get them to believe wrong, bad things that could hurt them, don't line up with what mommy and daddy believe.
Yeah.
Children have they're smarter than we think that they are, because they're picking up on the propaganda they're picking up on the trans propaganda at such a young age. And now with social media, they're being encouraged. And we know that I saw this almost 10 years ago, 7, 8 years ago. I saw this online of, you post something about being transgender, you post your coming out thing or a picture of yourself with a binder or something like that, and you're getting all the likes in the world and everybody's complimenting about how wonderful and brave you are. And that has just 10 years later, that's just gotten so extreme. I think young people are being completely swayed by what they think others want them to do and what they think they should be doing, and they don't know what they should be doing.
Yeah.
So it's really scary that the UN Agenda 2030, they are directly targeting children, and they name children, and they want all children to be agents of change.
I wonder, gosh, I mean, how many people does the UN employ? I mean, how many UN employees even understand, what the hell they're doing or what they're even a part of or and promoting? I mean, I just feel like, oh, obviously there are people who are purposely doing this within the organization.
Mhm.
And I wonder, like, all the women who work there at all levels, administrative levels,
Yeah.
legal capacity, translators, like all of these women having,
Mhm.
absolutely no idea, who's signing their paychecks. I mean, this is really monumental.
Well, that's a really good point, actually, because all of this relies upon um, our participation. So, one thing that the United Nations is pushing along with the World Economic Forum is this idea of stakeholder capitalism, which I won't like break down the whole thing right now, but it essentially means that everyone has a stakehold in the
Mm.
overall agenda.
So do you mean like literally they get stock or like
So,
like how would that translate for, when you work at like Apple, even if you are a genius at the Genius Bar, you get stock in Apple. So what do you mean by stakeholder?
so for example, let's take that. So, if you work at Apple, you're going to most major corporations are implementing this plan. And I think Apple is obviously one of them, but they're implementing this plan internally. And what that means is if you're an employee at Apple, well, suddenly you are possibly having to go to some type of cultural sensitivity training, some
Mm,
type of LGBT training, or you're getting emails about it, you're getting
right.
notifications about this. It's being brought up in your meetings. And when I say it, I mean inclusivity for transgender people. Maybe you walk into the bathroom at your company one day and it says gender neutral, or suddenly people are told, oh, we should all put our pronouns in our email. Like all that, that's what stakeholder means. Like suddenly you, as a low level employee, whether you're sweeping the floor in the stock room or you're like working in some big corporate office, suddenly you are in the bathroom with a man. So and you have to adhere to that for your job, because if you go against that, then you aren't agreeing to the company's policies of creating a safe and inclusive space. And companies who don't agree to these policies are going to be systematically left out of the new global economy. That's what the World Economic Forum and the United Nations have been
Mm,
saying. Specifically, they have their, what is it? It's PLGE, or Partnership for Global Equality. Oh, Partnership for Global LGBT Equality. They have this partnership, the UN and the World Economic Forum, and it's got all these huge, massive corporations involved. Salesforce, IBM, major credit cards, banks, like any big thing you can think of, you name it, and they're in this collaboration with the World Economic Forum and the UN. And what it says is that they have made an agreement to implement all of these policies in their companies, which will erase women and which will force women to be unsafe in their bathrooms and other sex segregated spaces because men will be included. All these companies are working together under this global partnership. And it says directly in all of the documents that the more you adhere to it, the more favor your company will get in the new global economy. The less you adhere, if you fail to meet these certain plans that they have for female erasure, then you won't get the same type of investment. Your company won't be invited to sit at certain tables with investors and global power players. So it's like a form of blackmail. You can think of it like
Right.
that.
Wow.
Because we were blackmailed. Women have been blackmailed into going along with this trans agenda. Like, how many women have you spoken to in your work who have said that they didn't want to go along with these things, but they felt forced to say this word? They felt forced to say menstruator. They felt forced to say birthing person. And you yourself were forced out of spaces because you wouldn't go along with it, which
Totally.
you spoke about at the UN protests so brilliantly. Like you were forced out of spaces, and many women have been forced out of spaces, not just spaces where we're learning or teaching, but jobs and employment, housing. Like, women are being forced out of having basic survival, like access to survival stuff, just for going against this agenda. We're being blackmailed into going along with it. So, for example, there are women I know, there are hundreds of women that follow me, and they all day long are posting about, like, oh, this is happening and that's happening. And then they have to go to work, and then they can't say anything when they're standing next to Peter Polly or whoever, and they can't say a word because their job will be at risk, and then they won't be able to pay their bills, and then they won't have a phone to even make posts. We're being blackmailed. And that's what it is it's a global, like, pyramid scheme. It's a top-down pyramid scheme. There's a reason why the pyramid is all over the place as a symbol. It's not like, ooh, it's a pyramid scheme. It's obvious. This is all a top-down implementation. It starts here, and they force. And suddenly you become a stakeholder. Suddenly you have an interest in it. Because if you don't perpetuate this agenda, you're out of a job. And, like, for example, they want to have this kill switch on the cars. So say suddenly you've made too many posts online where you've misgendered a trans person, or you said, men aren't women, or some other, like, basic material fact of reality. And they've decided that you've done too many wrong things on the internet, your car is going to get shut down. This is how these things could play out. I don't want to say they are going to, but this is how they could play out. And this is kind of the plan for that. Okay. They're going to utilize every corporation, every agency, every media outlet that they can to force this through.
Right.
So this is why we need mass non-compliance. This is why I say we need everyone to say no, because it doesn't work if just a few of us say no.
Yeah, in this moment, I'm feeling just overwhelmed, like detachment, but also overwhelmed. Like I'm organizing these events in Austin, and I ran a sponsored ad. And so my stuff, I think for the first time is getting in the face of women who are local to Austin.
Yay. How's that been? What's the reaction?
It's been a mixed bag. Been getting lots of the, enlivened, kind of like activated youth who are, as you said, like using that energy and that distaste and that disdain for the systems, but being agents of the trans agenda to, say things like, I'm killing children, or I should kill myself, or I'm disgusting or gross, all the things that we hear that just mean nothing at this point. I mean, once
Right.
as much as, once you even know a little bit about what's going on, it becomes just so clear that these women are not agents of free will. They're not.
No.
They're brainwashed, like I was.
Absolutely.
Like you were. We get it. And it's not personal. So
exactly.
Yeah, it's just to think about. I also just think about the energy, like the energy of these women's bodies being committed to
Yep.
the horizontal, violence, or the like you said in another interview you did, like instead of going like punching up, just the punching, just to whoever is
Yes, the
closest.
lateral violence. It's
Yeah.
lateral violence, and that's the thing with the trans agenda. It it's interesting. It puts the target on you and your own body. You're the problem, not the world. You're the problem. You and your body and your wrong thoughts and your wrong body are the problem, and they need to be fixed. And don't worry, Big Pharma can help you. We've got lots of like pills and hormones and gels and shots and patches and dermal implants, and you name it, we've got it. Soon, they want to put something in, literally put something in your brain, change your sex, change your genetics to change your sex. Like, this is not science fiction. This is science fiction turned science fact. There's a reason why we've been conditioned with all of these ideas through mass media and mainstream media for so long, because these ideas are coming to fruition. This is why, and again, why is this important for women? It's not just about erasing our so-called rights, because I mean, honestly, I don't even like working and operating within a rights framework, because I don't really believe that we have rights the way that they say we do. I think we have rights, we have birthrights, and we should be sovereign beings. I don't think my rights should come from a government. Our physical bodies, like the female body, is the site where oppression takes place. And you can see that so clearly with transgenderism.
Mm-hmm.
With the girls who believe that they are transgender, their body is a war zone. They are full of battle scars. Yeah. And you want to know what was blowing my mind last night? Like, I sat down and was like, oh, I better take some notes because I have so much to say about this. I don't want to be too all over the place. And I just was like looking up a couple of things to, compile my notes, and I came across an article that I hadn't seen before, and I was looking through it, and I won't name names, but someone that I was friends with, a female who identifies as male, who had a double mastectomy. I was there after she got it, actually, and I was supposed to be supportive, and I just remember feeling kind of sick and shocked and kind of horrified and uncomfortable to support it, but also know that I'm supposed to support it because this is what she needs or whatever. Well, anyways, I saw a video of her performing at the United Nations headquarters at a UN women event. It was like the first like
Oh my God.
LGBT like trans event held by the UN, and I was honestly like shocked. As you know, there are a number of people that I used to be friends with or run in the same like social and political activism spaces with that have gone on to become very prominent influencers on transgenderism, and not just influencers like on social media, but in policy as well. So I often have been shocked seeing different things on the internet. Like, one time I saw one of my friends was a man, a former friend, a man who was a gay man when I knew him and then started identifying as a woman. So I came across an article about him. This was like a year or so ago, saying that he was an invited speaker as a lesbian woman of color at Harvard. So I get like little shocks like this and weird things that I see all the time. I'm like, oh, I know that person. Like, this happens all the time. But last night when I saw my friend at the UN headquarters, or my former friend, I was honestly a little bit sick.
It's like a zombie takeover. It's like you like these people, whether it's like children or family members or friends, it's like a full body mind occupation, like complete kidnapping. But they're there, but it's even scarier because they're not dead. They're physically there. Their flesh is there. It's been repurposed, it's been mutilated, it's been, altered. And but that is really disturbing.
No, it's really disturbing because they're specifically targeting people of color. They target Black, Indigenous, Brown, Asian, Muslim. They're specifically targeting people based on race to put them at the front of this agenda.
To conflate racism with
To conflate
transgenderism.
race and transgenderism,
Mhm.
which is really, it sucks because there is such thing as an intersection of oppression between race and sex, and that exists, and that is something that's very important to examine, but it's been completely co-opted.
Right.
And the UN actually loves to co-opt the theory of intersectionality. They have been throwing around the term intersectionality, and a lot of these trans rights activists on the street that I confront also use the term intersectionality. They don't know what the hell it means, though, at all, and they don't know where it comes from. And it comes from a Black lawyer, Kimberly Crenshaw, who did argue in the court of law that Black women are oppressed not just on the basis of their race because they're Black, but also because they're women. And that means that they experience a specific intersection of oppression, being Black and being female. And that's where that comes from. And that analysis can be applied to other, other oppressions and other like identity markers or whatever, real identity markers, not made up ones. But that's what they're trying to do, is apply it to something made up and say they're replacing sex with gender. So even in the UN propaganda where they talk about intersectionality, they just like erase the fact that Kimberly Crenshaw was talking about Black women, Black females, and they just put gender instead. And they're teaching this stuff to people that have no idea about the history of these languages or these movements or any of this. They're just blank slates, and they hear these things and, oh, I'll parrot that now. Intersectionality. I don't even know what that means.
I mean, it's like that some of the messages I've been getting recently are like, they're not even like consistent with me being transphobic. They'll say homophobic. Like there's no consistency. All you need is the buzz word. Like there's never any kind of critical response or analysis or genuine curiosity. It's always just,
well, you
racist.
Can't have an analysis when you're basing everything on reality.
Right.
There is no reality in transgender. It doesn't make any sense. And you can't have a good argument for it because it's crap.
Yeah.
And this whole thing, these thought termination, in the LGBT cult and the trans cult, thought termination is really, really important. And I practiced it internally all the time, and I enforced it on other people around me. You use the wrong language, I'm going to correct it. I thought the wrong language in my head, another little voice is going to remind me that's transphobic. You have internalized misogyny, internalized trans misogyny against men. But everything is designed to terminate thought. You don't need to think about it because it's wrong. All you need to know is they're bigots.
It's wrong. Yeah.
And it's wrong. And that's it. Thought terminated.
Total intolerance. So going back to my question, have there been, can you pinpoint individuals who you've seen as key players, like currently at the UN, who are pushing, or as you said, or is it just mass compliance? Like who is making sure, or is it kind of something like you kind of what am I trying to say? Like, you touch the first domino and then it all kind of, falls and creates like a ripple effect from there. I mean, how much maintenance do you think is required now that it's totally taken off?
I mean, I think it's pretty simple for them to do. They're the low-level workers at the UN seem to be completely brainwashed to the agenda. They think they're doing something good. They have no understanding of the implications of what this is going to unleash. And then I would say the people who are not low-level employees, the people who are actually running the organizations and the agencies and sitting on the boards and running the meetings and all of that, they know exactly what they're doing, and they will benefit personally from this, or we don't know, they might face some type of repercussion if they don't push it. If we know that this overtly runs on blackmail, then I would guess that this also covertly runs on blackmail as well. So people who don't want to participate can be blackmailed just the same way that a normal person can be blackmailed. Now, when we think about the UN, we just have to understand that it was never something good. From inception, this has always been about imposing, creating a world of tighter top-down control and getting governments to work together towards global agendas. And I think we should talk about the sustainability goals and what Agenda 2030 is a little bit more, and just like elucidate that.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. So the UN has really, really big plans for us, for all of us. UN has big plans for you. They've got big plans for me. But obviously we don't comply and we don't consent. I don't comply. I don't consent. I won't go along with any of this. I'm going to keep talking about it until my last breath. This is really an agenda. I've called it the agenda of a million names, or the devil with 1,000 faces. This agenda, the UN sustainability goals, is also called Agenda 2030, Envision 2050, America 2050, the SDG goals, the global goals, the 17 goals. What else has it been called? They've called it so many different things.
Yeah.
It's a method of just kind of making everything really ambiguous and confusing the public.
I think maybe, I mean, I'm most familiar with Agenda 2030, which is what I thought, which is why I thought we had another 10 years for all the COVID bullshit. Like when I learned about, when I was like learning about what was coming for mandated adult vaccines, I was like, oh, okay, this is terrifying. And we have 10 years. Like it's, we still have a while to like figure it out. And then
to stop this.
And then 2020 hit and I was like, oh, wait, that came a lot sooner. And I now understand that the end, like the results will be fixed. It's not like they're starting in 2030. So yeah, I wonder if people listening will also relate to the 2030 agenda more. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. Like it is totally ambiguous. And when I would hear Agenda 2030, I wouldn't associate it with any one organization or institution.
Yeah. And I remember also when I had first was learning about Agenda 2030 and Agenda 21, which are also the sort of not the same thing. Agenda 21 is like the 100-year plan. Agenda 2030 is the shorter term plan. And like when I first was learning about that, it was more so from the framework of my work in environmentalism and supporting Indigenous sovereignty. And I was realizing that, oh, the UN has a plan to like basically take control of all public land and also push Native people off reservations and their traditional territories and take 50% of the land in America and turn it over to, what do they call it? Like no population zones or no human contact zones. And this is all under the guise of conservation. They're conserving the environment. So they need to seize land from people and force people into big cities and smart cities and stuff like that. And when I was first learning about that and I looked at the overarching goals of like basically a global government, I was really wondering how they were going to pull it off. You know, I was like, I don't know, how the hell are they going to do this? How are they going to make all of these things happen? So I thought it was going to be like, I don't know what I thought it was going to be like. Honestly, I thought it was going to be a lot of small things at once. Like, I didn't know what I thought it was, but I knew something was coming. I knew there was a plan and I knew I had to be vigilant. And as soon as I started to hear the mention of the virus, the C-19, the COVID-A, I was like, oh no, this is it. Like, this is it. This is how they're going to do this. I could just tell right away where it was headed. the introduction of the masking, saying that this is a global issue, and how the fact that they were pushing global, 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 and the fact that it started in China. That was my first clue. It started in China. My family is actually Chinese and escaped China, Mao's communist revolution, and left to Taiwan. And I get really frustrated when Americans don't understand how like evil and brutal and totalitarian the Chinese regime is, and how brainwashed the citizens of China are. It's very frustrating. And what people need to know is that China is part of the United Nations. It's not like they're separate from it. China, the United States, and the UK, and 193 member nation states. And not just China, but other countries that are led by people who have done like really terrible genocides and lead totalitarian regimes. They're all part of the United Nations. And I think when I saw what was happening with COVID, I knew right away this is how they're going to start to implement this. And it started to make sense, like, oh my God, they're now controlling where we go. They're controlling who we can see. They want to control what goes inside of us. They want to force us to put something inside of us. This is all part of the overarching plan, obviously part of the plan. And people still are resistant to this idea that any part of this was planned. And that's just ridiculous. Move on, people. Like, you're wrong. You've been wrong. And if you don't understand why, there are an infinite amount of resources out there. And I can tell you, you're not looking hard enough if you don't get how this is planned. Look up Event 201, look up the Rockefeller Foundation's lockstep plans. It's all right there. Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals, the World Economic Forum's Great Reset. It's all right there and in your faces.
And now we have the papers from Pfizer that weren't supposed to be released for 75 years, outlining in disturbing detail all of the injuries that ensued during the clinical trials of the shots that they told us were 98% effective or something ridiculous. So yeah, it's all, at this point, it's willful ignorance to pretend like, this, it's not out there. Or the echo chamber is just so strong and people are so dissociative that they, even when it is right there, they're saying, oh no, that hand is actually a cup.
Yes, exactly.
It's, but that's exactly the effect of, hammering us for years and telling us that, up is down. And
I always say the most basic form of repetition is, or the most basic form of mind control is repetition. Repeat it over again and often enough, and you will start to change somebody's thoughts.
Yeah.
Especially vulnerable people like children.
Yeah, totally.
And actually, there's something really important going on with the World Health Organization, which is one of the United Nations 15 agencies that has to do with this topic, because actually they recently met. There was like an international health regulations forum, right? That the WHO was at, and what they call it, the Global Pandemic Treaty at the World Health Assembly. This happened at the end of May. So basically, the World Health Organization wants to get all the countries to agree to this regulation that would say that the United Nations and the World Health Organization can dictate whether a member country is having a public health crisis or not. So even if the country says, no, we have no public health crisis here, there is no emergency, the UN can de facto come in and say, yes, you do have a public health emergency, and we will tell you how to deal with it.
Wow.
And you will deal with it as such to protect global security.
Wow.
So that's what's trying to be pushed right now. And all this is born out of the COVID regulations. People need to understand. I don't care what you think about the quote virus. I mean, I have lots of thoughts about that, as you know, but forget that and just look at what they're doing with it. Look what they're doing based on the lockdowns, based on the restrictions, based on the alleged virus. This is the response, and the response is extremely dangerous. This is basically a very draconian, totalitarian global government. And it starts with this like World Health Organization, UN pandemic treaty, and it ends with you owning nothing and being totally dependent on a new world government run by the World Economic Forum and the United Nations. And the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, they've said, you will own nothing and you will be happy. And I've spoke about how when they say that you will own nothing, they don't just mean you won't own your car or you won't own property or you won't own a house. You as a woman won't own your own uterus. You won't own your own reproductive technology. You don't own your own body. You don't own your own name. So when they say own nothing, we have to understand that means they want to strip us of our female reproductive control and capacity. And that is a major part of what's going on with all of this. This is about transforming the economy from the last industrial revolution into the fourth industrial revolution, which is about merging information technology and biological together. So merging our bodies with digital. That's what this is all about. This is transhumanism.
Yeah.
And when all of that technology is based on the exploitation of the female reproductive system, we are under attack on a global level. And you can see they're starting, it's on all levels. You see it with your work, especially we've got the surrogacy issues there. So while at the same time that they're promoting surrogacy, they're saying that we are just uterus havers, we're just bleeders, we're these dehumanized, machinified, objectified, non-human entities with mechanical functions that can produce for global governments. I guess that's what we've been
that's exactly what
to.
they're saying.
It's what we've been reduced to. Our bodies can be rented, our wombs can be rented for surrogacy. And now they're pushing artificial womb technology. They are pushing the idea that men deserve to and can medically get pregnant and give birth. So all kinds of heinous experimentation is being done. And this is all to usurp female reproductive power. And why would they be so focused on that? Because population control. What does population control mean? It means woman control. When you hear population control, I need you to think woman control. Because that's what it is. It's a control of our bodies, because the female body creates and births every person on this planet and all future generations. If they can control our female bodies, they can control the world. That's why this is a global agenda. That's why women all over the world are being targeted by the UN Sustainable Development Goals, aka Agenda 2030, aka Agenda 21. Women are being specifically targeted for female erasure. And the UN admits that there are 17 global goals, right? Number 5 is for gender equality. That's the one that we're protesting, because when they say gender equality, they mean including men and boys within the concept of women and girls. So gender equality means our erasure under transgenderism. They are promoting this across all 17 goals. So goal 5, it's one individual goal, but it's permeates every single one of the goals. And this is in their own words, and it's in the documents. It's in every single goal. Our erasure is foundational to the burgeoning fourth industrial revolution. And we really need to get that through our heads and start focusing on looking up. We talked about that earlier. We need to look up at who's doing this to us, and we need to get out of the zone of lateral violence of blaming, low level entities. It's important to showcase what people are doing and the result of all this brainwashing, but we shouldn't get so hung up on like attacking individual people or whatever. We need to look up at who is doing this to us.
Right.
Because this is literally like do or die. I can't express that enough. It's literally rise or die. So we need to put a stop to this for the children who don't have a voice, who have no idea that this is happening. We need to put our sovereignty to use. We need to stand up and heed the call to courage and take control of ourselves and our lives and the information that we receive and what we're paying attention to. Really be careful about what you're paying attention to, because they're really trying to manipulate us through, a control of our emotions.
Yeah.
And I want to, say again that propaganda is legal in this country. Domestic propaganda, using it on citizens, is totally been legal since like 2012 with the Smith-Mundt Act. And then in 2013, they had the National Defense Authorization Act, which I actually protested way back in the day when it was going to be, when it was being introduced. I went to my local congressional office and did a demonstration there. And the NDAA, it's all about legalized propaganda on the US public and manipulating us for the goals of the US government. And the goals of the US government are tied in directly to the World Health Organization and and all agencies within the United Nations. And in the video, I show the US Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, talking about how the US is specifically pushing transgender ideology and using transgender to put males into female positions of power. So yeah, it's a conspiracy.
It's a
I
nightmare.
didn't make it up. I didn't make it up. And
no one has to. I mean, you can just look around. I mean, whether people feel that it's for good or for evil, I don't think anyone at this point can deny the prevalence of men and women's spaces and the normalization of men and women's spaces. I think on both sides, I think that the discrepancy is if it's good or evil and what it's about. But at this point, yeah, everywhere we look, I mean, it's wild. Well, I can't wait for more women to watch the recording, and I love that you pieced together so many new elements of it than just our speeches. They're so.
And check out the website too, because I made it specifically to be a resource for people who don't have time and who don't know what to look into. Go right on the website. I've got infographics that you can save to your computer. You can email them to people. You can save it on your phone and send it in a text message, put it in a WhatsApp group or whatever Signal app, whatever you use. You can post it to your social media. You can keep it for personal reference, and they all link directly to the sources.
Yeah.
So this is information that we can use. This isn't like, this doesn't like belong to me, this issue, right? I'm just the first woman who's trying to piece it together in this way and sound the alarm. And it's not going to mean anything if other women don't heed the call.
Yeah.
And come to the table and say, what can I do?
Yeah.
We need women to put the focus here and now, not because I'm asking you to, but because our future depends on it.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support my work, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To stay in the loop for my latest coaching programs, hypnosis sessions, free resource guides, and more, follow me on Instagram at whosebodyisit and visit my website, whosebodyisit.com.